He went looking for a lost cow at 3 in the morning. He found an orc mother and a 5-year-old girl sleeping in the mud under a stone bridge. He said nothing. She asked for nothing. But the girl looked up at him and said, "Are you going to leave us here?" Winter came 3 weeks early that year. Bren noticed when he went to check the barn on Monday night and found the back door open, the latch split by wind, and the oldest cow gone. A plain brown animal his wife had called Lady, for reasons she never explained and he never asked about. He stood in the barn doorway for a moment, looked at the others. 2 horses, 4 goats, the young mare he'd bought in autumn, who had not yet decided whether she liked him. He went back inside, got his coat, got the lantern and the mud boots, walked out. There was no moon. The mill road curved gently down the hill before crossing the creek at the stone bridge, a low, old structure built by some grandfather of someone no one remembered anymore. Bren knew every stone of it. He had crossed that bridge so many times, he no longer looked at the ground when he walked it. But that night he raised the lantern before he stepped onto it, and stopped. Under the bridge, in a dry hollow between the stone wall and the creek bank, there were 2 figures. One large, one small. The large one had her back to him, wrapped in a canvas coat that had been green at some distant point. Dark green skin. Wide shoulders pulled in against the cold. Underneath the coat, a child. Only the black hair was visible, and the breathing, a faint vapor rising in the still air. Bren did not move. The brown cow was 20 yards further on, grazing at the creek's edge, as if nothing were the matter. He did not go after the cow. He stood with the lantern in his hand, and the heat of the flame did not reach the 2 figures under the bridge, and he thought about how many cold nights this winter had held, and how many of those nights these 2 had spent here. The large figure moved, not a startled movement, a controlled one, the kind learned by someone who had trained herself to wake slowly, without sound, without sudden motion. The orc turned in one careful shift, placed her body between the child and the lantern, and looked at him. Amber eyes. Not afraid, calculating. He raised the lantern slightly, not toward her, but to the side, so she could see his face. Neither of them spoke. Then the child woke. The girl came out from under the coat with her hair pressed flat against one cheek and blinked at the lantern light. 5 years old, maybe. Skin a shade lighter green than her mother's. The same amber eyes. She looked at him without particular alarm, the way someone looks at a thing that has happened before. "Are you going to leave us here?" she asked. The mother said nothing. Did not correct her. Kept her eyes on Bren. Bren looked at the girl. Then he lowered the lantern, went and collected the brown cow, and walked back to the farm. He did not sleep the rest of the night. At 5 in the morning, he lit the kitchen stove, put water to boil, cut bread, fried 2 eggs, stood looking at the table while he ate. The table had 6 chairs. For 4 years he had used one. He finished, washed his plate, and stood for a moment with his hands on the edge of the sink, looking out the kitchen window at the field still dark outside. Then he took his coat, the unlit lantern, and the wicker basket that had hung on its hook since autumn, and went to the barn. He filled the basket with what he had, a whole loaf left over from the day before, 2 pieces of salt-cured meat wrapped in cloth, half a small wheel of cheese, 3 apples. He took the wool blanket from the corner chest, the double blanket, with a patch on the left edge that his wife had sewn with thread that didn't quite match the original. He folded it carefully. On the shelf above the chest sat a small clay lamp, handleless, cracked along one side, the kind travelers leave behind. His wife had kept it there. He had not moved it in 4 years. He looked at it for a moment, left it where it was, put everything in the basket, walked to the bridge. It was light enough by then to leave the lantern unlit. The orc was awake, sitting at the edge of the hollow, the child still sleeping behind her. When he got close enough, she stood, not to run, but to be standing. She was tall, a full head taller than him. He set the basket on the ground, nudged it toward her with his boot. She looked at the basket, looked at him. "It's not charity," he said. "It's bread that'll go hard, and meat that'll turn if no one eats it." She didn't answer. He left the basket and the blanket, turned, and walked back to the farm. 3 days later, the basket was sitting at the edge of the road, empty and clean, the cloth that had wrapped the meat folded neatly on top. He picked it up without stopping. The inspector arrived on a low-sky morning, riding a well-kept gray horse with a document folded in the pocket of his vest. Bren was repairing the barn latch when he saw him coming down the road. He stayed where he was. Aldrich Vane was a man in his mid-40s, face without strong expression, hair going white at the temples. Not a cruel man, a man with a list. "Bren Ashcroft," he said, without dismounting. "Vane," Bren said, "we received a complaint regarding irregular use of the Mill Road crossing. There are unregistered individuals occupying space under the stone bridge." He unfolded the document part way, without offering it. "I have authority from the magistrate to notify and require vacating within 48 hours. The bridge is public," Bren said. "The creek bank is county property." Vane refolded the paper. 48 hours from today at first light. If there's no voluntary vacating, I'll return with 2 men from the office. He pulled his reins and went back up the road. Bren stood with the tool in his hand and watched the rider go. That afternoon, he walked to the bridge. Sova was washing something in the creek. Small clothes, a child's things. Cale sat on a rock nearby, playing with sticks. Bren stopped at the edge of the bridge. "They came to tell me you have 48 hours, he said. Sova did not stop washing, did not turn. "I heard," she said. First time he'd heard her speak. Low voice, no particular accent. "We were leaving anyway." "Where to?" Silence. Kyle looked up at him. "Mama said maybe the big city," the girl said. "But she doesn't know the name of it." "Kyle," her mother said, quiet. The girl closed her mouth, but kept looking at Bren. He stood there a moment. Then, "I have a room I don't use." He said it looking at the water, not at her. "Separate from the main house. It used to be for travelers. Has a small stove. No bed, but there's a wooden floor and straw. It's dry. It's warm enough." Silence. Sova wrung out the last small shirt and folded it without looking at him. "We don't need charity," she said. "I didn't offer charity." He picked up a flat stone from the ground and turned it in his hand. "I offered a room." She didn't answer. Kyle slid off her rock and crouched at the water's edge, pretending to look for something in the current. But her ears were up. Bren set the stone down. "The inspector comes back day after tomorrow," he said. "You'll be gone by then, or you won't. That's your decision." He looked at the child once. The room doesn't lock from the outside. He turned and walked back up the road. That evening, he moved the spare cot from the storage loft into the pilgrim room, a small structure attached to the east side of the barn. One room, a cast-iron stove, 2 small windows, a door that opened inward. His wife had called it the pilgrim room because that's who had stayed there. A traveling healer once, a seed merchant twice, a young woman fleeing a bad marriage who spent 3 weeks inside it and never said where she'd come from. He made up the cot, left a candle on the sill, left the door unlatched. He did not wait up. Sometime before dawn, he heard the door. Not the main house door, the pilgrim room door. He lay still and listened to the sound of 2 people moving carefully, trying not to be heard. A child's whisper, cut short. Then silence. Then the stove. The particular creak of that stove's iron door. He knew it the way he knew every sound in every structure on his land. He turned onto his side and closed his eyes. Aldrich Vane came back on the third day. Bren was splitting wood in the yard when he heard the horse on the road. He kept splitting. Set a log. Swung. Set another. Vane dismounted this time. He stood at the edge of the yard with his hands behind his back, watching Bren work for a moment before speaking. "The bridge has been vacated," he said. "Good," Bren said. "A report came in this morning from Merchant Dole." Vane's voice didn't change. "He says he saw smoke from your pilgrim room." Bren set another log. Swung. "Wood burns," he said. "He says he saw a green-skinned woman drawing water from your well." Bren set the axe against the stump and turned. He looked at Vane without hurry. "My well is on my land," he said. "Harboring unregistered persons is a fine, worthy offense under the county writ." Vane reached into his coat and produced a folded document. He held it out. 12 silver marks, or a signed declaration that you have no formal arrangement with any unregistered individual currently present on your property. Bren looked at the document, did not take it. "And if I pay the 12 marks? Then you're in compliance, for now." "And the woman and child?" Vane's expression did not shift. "That would depend on whether a second complaint is filed." Bren looked at the document a moment longer. "Come back in 2 days," he said. "I'll have your answer." Vane folded the paper back into his coat, mounted, rode away without another word. Bren walked to the pilgrim room. He knocked once before opening the door. Sova was sitting on the cot, mending something. Kael was asleep in the corner on a pile of straw, with the wool blanket pulled up to her chin, the blanket with the mismatched patch. Sova looked up when he came in. She had a needle in one hand and didn't put it down. He told her about Vane, about the document, about the 12 marks. She listened without expression. When he finished, she looked back at the mending in her hands. "We'll be gone by morning," she said. "I didn't come here to tell you to go." She looked up again. "The 12 marks," he said. "I have them. That's not the problem." "Then what is?" He stood in the doorway, looked at the child sleeping under the blanket. "There's a second room," he said. "In the main house. It was my son's. He didn't come back from the war. Same war that ended 5 years before my wife got sick." He paused. "It has a real bed. 2 windows. Faces east, so it gets morning light." Sova was very still. "I'm not offering that room," he said. "I'm telling you it exists, in case it matters to your decision." He pulled the door closed behind him and went back to the wood pile. He split wood for another hour, long past what he needed. 3 weeks passed. Sova worked. She did not ask what needed doing. She looked until she found it, and then she did it. The first morning she repaired the fence line along the north pasture, the section that had been leaning since the last rains. The second morning she was in the barn before him, already halfway through the feeding. By the end of the first week she had restacked the entire wood supply, which he had let go uneven since the previous winter. He did not thank her. She did not expect it. They established a rhythm the way 2 people will when they are both accustomed to working alone, by staying out of each other's way, and by noticing when the other had already done the thing. Kyle was a different matter. The girl followed Bren on the third day, not closely. She kept 10 feet of distance, watching him work with the focused attention of a child who has learned to observe before she approaches. He ignored her. She persisted. By mid-morning she had closed the distance to 5 feet, then 3, and when he stopped to rest against the fence post, she stood next to him and looked at the field. "Do the goats have names?" she asked. "No," he said. She considered this. "They should," she said. He looked at the goats. "Pick ones then," he said. She named all 4 in the next 10 minutes. He did not ask her to repeat them, but by evening he found he remembered them anyway. On a Tuesday in the 4th week, he came in from the field at midday to find Kyle sitting at the kitchen table. This had not happened before. The main house had remained Bren's space. He had not said so, and Sova had not asked, but it was understood. Kyle was sitting very straight in one of the chairs, looking at the table. When he came in, she looked up. "I'm sorry," she said. "Mama said I should wait outside, but I was cold." He looked at her for a moment. Then he went to the stove and put a pot on. "Are you hungry?" he said. "Yes," she said. He made porridge, set a bowl in front of her, sat across the table and ate his own. Kyle ate 3 bites and then looked up at him. "My papa is dead," she said. "I know," he said. "Mama doesn't talk about him." "No." She looked at her bowl, stirred it once. "She cries sometimes at night," Kyle said, "when she thinks I'm asleep." She looked up again. "Do you cry?" He looked at her. "Sometimes," he said. She nodded like this was the correct answer, went back to eating. When the bowl was empty, she pushed it toward the middle of the table, slid off the chair, and went to the door. Then she stopped. She turned around and looked at him with the particular directness that was entirely her own. "You're not like the other men who came to the bridge," she said. He waited. "The other ones had torches," she said. "You had a lantern?" Then she went out. He sat at the table for a while after that. Cale was asleep before sundown that same Tuesday, worn out from a morning in the kitchen and an afternoon renaming goats. Sova had checked on her, pulled the blanket up, and left the pilgrim room door open a crack. Then she crossed the yard to the main house. She had not done this before. She stopped at the door, knocked once, and came in without waiting for an answer. Bren was at the table with a harness. He looked up. She sat down across from him. Not close. On the far side of the table, hands flat on the wood. "There is a traitor," she said. "He comes through Grimwater. He knew my husband's clan, crossed paths with them before the Northern War." She looked at the table. "He passed through 2 weeks back. He saw us at the well. He offered passage north as far as the Thornback settlements. 2 days' ride. There are orc families there." Bren set the harness down. "He comes back through on Friday," she said. The kitchen was quiet. Outside, one of the goats made a sound and went still. "What did you tell him?" Bren said. "Nothing yet." He was quiet for a moment. Then he got up, went to the shelf above the dry sink, and took down the lantern, the one he had carried to the bridge that first night. He set it on the table between them. She looked at it. He sat back down. "Friday's 2 days out," he said. She looked at the lantern for a long moment. Then she picked up her hands from the table and set them in her lap. "Yes," she said. "It is." She did not send word to the traitor. Vane came on a Wednesday morning, and this time he brought another man. The second man was younger, with a document satchel, and the look of someone who had been told this would be straightforward. They dismounted at the gate. Bren was on the porch. He did not come down. Sova was behind the barn. He could hear the sound of work stopping. Vane came to the foot of the porch steps. "Mr. Ashcroft," he said, "I have a magistrate's order." He nodded to the younger man, who opened the satchel and produced a sealed document. "Registered complaint from Merchant Dole, corroborated by 2 others on the mill road. The order requires you to either produce registration papers for any non-citizen residents of this property, or vacate them by end of week. Failure to comply carries a standing fine of 4 silver marks per day and possible seizure of non-essential outbuildings." He held out the document. Bren came down the steps and took it. He broke the seal, read it slowly. The younger man shifted his weight. Vane waited. Bren folded the document. "What kind of registration?" he said. Something shifted in Vane's expression. "Barely. Residency registration through the county office," he said. "Proof of lawful arrangement, employment contract, proof of shelter agreement, registered address. How long does registration take? Filing can be done same day. Processing takes up to 2 weeks. So if I file today, she's registered within 2 weeks. If all documents are in order, yes. And during those 2 weeks, provisional status, No action can be taken against a registered provisional resident. Bren looked at him. Then I'll file today, he said. Both of them. The woman and the child. The younger man looked at Vane. Vane looked at Bren. The filing requires a named local guarantor, Vane said. Someone with registered property in the county. Someone willing to sign their name to the arrangement. I have registered property, Bren said. A long silence. It also requires a declared nature of arrangement, Vane said. Employment, tenancy, or family. Bren said nothing for a moment. He was looking past Vane at the corner of the barn. Sova had come around the edge of it. She was standing very still, 20 feet away. She had heard. She was looking at him with the same expression she had used that first night under the bridge. Not afraid, calculating, trying to read what came next. Cale was next to her, pressed against her mother's side, also looking at him. He turned back to Vane. Tenancy, he said. We'll start with tenancy. Vane studied him for a moment. All right, he said. The county office opens at 8. I know where it is, Bren said. They rode to town that afternoon. Bren on his older horse, Sova walking beside it. He offered her the younger mare, and she said she preferred the ground. He understood that. Some people need to feel the distance they're covering. He didn't ask further. Kyle rode on the horse behind Bren because it was a long walk for short legs, and nobody discussed it. The county office was a square building with a low ceiling and a clerk behind a wide desk who looked at the three of them for a moment before pulling out the correct form. He asked questions. Bren answered them. Sova answered the ones directed at her in the same flat, precise voice she used for everything. Name, origin, years in the region, prior address listed as none. When the form reached the line for nature of arrangement, the clerk looked up at Bren. Bren took the form, set it flat on the desk, uncapped the pen. He crossed out the word tenancy. He wrote family. He did not look at Sova when he did it, but he heard her breathing change. The clerk looked at the form, looked at Bren, looked at Sova. He stamped it and filed it without further question. They were back on the road before the sun dropped below the tree line. Halfway home, Kyle said, "What did you write on the paper?" "A word," Brent said. "Which word?" He looked at the road ahead. "One that means you don't have to leave," he said. She seemed to accept this. She leaned against his back slightly, the way a child will when they've run out of questions, and the movement of a horse is enough. Sova walked beside them without speaking, but at some point her hand came to rest briefly on the horse's flank. Not the reins, not the saddle, just the horse's side. She took it away before he could decide if it meant anything. That evening, Bren made dinner for 3. He did not announce this. He simply put 3 bowls on the table instead of 1, set 3 spoons, put the pot in the middle. Sova came in from washing up and stopped in the doorway. She looked at the table. Bren was already sitting, already eating. She sat down, served herself, served Kyle. They ate without speaking. Kyle asked if the goats had eaten. Bren said yes. She reported on the name she had changed for the youngest one, who she'd decided didn't suit his original name. Bren said she was probably right. Sova said nothing. When the bowls were cleared, Kyle fell asleep on the bench before anyone could move her. Sova picked her up without a word and carried her to the pilgrim room. Bren sat at the table. After a while he got up, went to the chest in the corner of his room, and opened it. He looked at what was inside for a moment. Then he took out a second wool blanket, heavier than the first one he'd brought to the bridge. Darker. His wife had made it the winter before she got sick. He had not taken it out since. He carried it to the pilgrim room and knocked once. Sova opened the door. Kyle was already in the cot, asleep under the first blanket, the one with the mismatched patch. He held out the second blanket. Sova looked at it. Looked at him. "It's cold tonight," he said. She took it. She did not say thank you. He did not wait for it. He turned and went back to the main house and sat in the chair by the kitchen stove until the fire burned low. Winter loosened its grip in small steps, the way it always did in that part of the country. First the ice on the north edge of the creek, then the mud in the yard going from solid to soft, then the smell of the soil changing. Sova had been on the farm for 9 weeks. She had stopped avoiding the kitchen. It had happened gradually. First she came in for tools, then for water. Then one morning Bren came in from the barn and found her standing at the stove with the kettle on, and she did not move out of the way or apologize for being there. She poured a cup of hot broth and set it on the table and went back to the pot. He sat down. She sat across from him. They drank in silence for 20 minutes. Then she went back to work, and so did he. This became a thing that happened in the mornings. One evening in the same 9th week, Bren was repairing a harness at the kitchen table when Sova came in and sat across from him without asking and began mending something of her own. Kyle was asleep. The stove had been burning since sundown, and the room was warm. Outside, the wind was working at the shutters. He worked. She worked. At some point, she said, without looking up. His name was Dorak. He kept his hands on the harness. He was a good man, she said. Not a careful one. Bren looked at the leather in his hands. Mine was careful, he said. Didn't save her. Silence. No, Sova said. It doesn't. They went back to work. Neither of them said anything else for the rest of the evening. But when she left her mending on the table, a small shirt of Kyle's, half finished, in the way that means I'll be back tomorrow. On the morning of the 64th day, Bren was splitting wood when Kale came out of the pilgrim room in her coat and boots, which she had put on herself, and incorrectly. She walked to the woodpile and stood next to him the way she always did when she had decided something. Bren, she said. He kept splitting. Bren, she said again. He set the axe against the stump and looked at her. She looked up at him with the full seriousness that a 5-year-old uses when the subject requires it. Can I call you Papa? She said. Everything in the yard was still. The wind had stopped. The goats were quiet. Even the young mare at the far end of the paddock had lifted her head and was looking at nothing in particular, with the distant alertness of an animal that senses a change in the air. Bren looked at the girl. She waited. He picked up the axe. You can call me what you like, he said. He set a new log. Swung. Kale stood there for a moment. Then she said, Papa. Just once, testing the weight of it. Then she turned and went back inside. Bren kept splitting. Set a log. Swung. Set another. He worked through the rest of the pile, which took another 20 minutes. And when he was done, he stood in the yard with the axe in his hand and the split wood all around him. He did not look at anything in particular. After a while, he went inside. Sova was at the stove when he came in. She did not turn. She poured a cup of broth and set it on the table. He sat down. Her hand stayed near his on the table for a moment. Not touching, just near. Then she went back to the stove. He drank. Outside, Kale was talking to one of the goats. He couldn't hear the words. Only the tone. Patient, explanatory. The way she spoke to things she'd decided to take care of. After a while, Sova sat down across from him with her own cup. The kitchen was quiet. At some point, she reached across the table and set something down beside his cup. He looked at it. The small clay lamp from the barn shelf. The one his wife had kept. The one he had looked at the first morning before he brought the basket to the bridge and left behind. Handleless, cracked along one side. Sova had found it, kept it, brought it here. She didn't explain it. He didn't ask. He picked it up and set it on the shelf above the dry sink, between the tin of salt and the spare candle. Where things go that are meant to stay. Outside, the first real warmth of the almost spring moved through the valley. Kale's voice carried over the yard. still explaining something to the goat, still patient, still entirely certain the goat was listening. Bran looked at the lamp on the shelf. The lantern that had shown his face at the bridge. The lamp she'd carried across the yard the night she chose to stay. The same light, smaller now, in a different hand. He left it where it was. To end. What hit harder, when she didn't send word to the trader, or when he wrote family on the form? Drop it below. And if you're new here, subscribe. There's more where this came from.